will be going into the area without insurance. So why does this matter? Well, normally around 20 million barrels of oil a day pass through the Hormuz Strait, and that 20 million barrels is around a quarter of global maritime oil flows of 76 million barrels a day, and it's around a fifth of global oil consumption of 102 million barrels a day. And that's why the global oil price did this on Sunday when trading opened, instantly spiking 10% to $82 a barrel. Now, that's a significant move, though. Zooming out, it's worth bearing in mind that it's still well below the price of more than $120 a barrel seen after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Nevertheless, a sustained global oil price spike could push up global inflation, particularly through the impact on petrol prices, and also hold back global economic growth. In 2023, the International Monetary Fund estimated that a 10% increase in oil prices could increase global inflation by 0.4 percentage points the following year, and also reduce global growth by around 0.15 percentage points. Remember, though, this analysis is based on global oil prices remaining 10% higher for a prolonged period. Donald Trump has said the conflict could last less than 4 weeks. Oil prices might fall back if hostilities abate and marine traffic is able to resume through Hormuz.
Hello, live from London. This is BBC News with me, Ben Brown. Our latest headlines. American and Israeli attacks on Iran enter a third day. President Trump says they will continue, but he gives no clear timeline for the war.
Right from the beginning, we projected 4 to 5 weeks, but we have capability to go far longer than that. We'll do it. Whatever somebody said today, they said, oh, well, if the president wants to do it really quickly. After that, he'll get bored. I don't get bored.
The conflict widens across the Middle East. Lebanon says 52 people have been killed there in Israeli strikes. Sir Keir Starmer allows British bases to be used to launch defensive attacks on Iran, but he says the UK won't be joining the American-Israeli offensive operations against Iran.
Any UK actions must always have a lawful basis and a viable, thought-through plan.
Hello, President Trump says his war against Iran is ahead of schedule. Speaking at the White House today, he said the US military campaign, Epic Fury as it's called, is aimed at eliminating the threat from what he called a terrorist regime. His Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, insisted it will not be an endless war. Well, Iran has staged retaliatory strikes right across the Middle East after the killing of its supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, while the United States and Israel have continued their offensive against Iranian targets. Israeli jets have been focused on the capital, Tehran, with huge explosions reported there. The Iranian Red Crescent says more than 550 people have been killed. And today, the war spread. Now, Lebanon has been drawn into the conflict, with the health ministry there saying at least 52 people have been killed in Israeli strikes. Israel responding to attacks by the Iranian-backed Shia militant group Hezbollah. For its part, Iran has hit energy sites like this oil refinery in Saudi Arabia and a major gas plant in Qatar. Global oil and gas prices have now risen sharply. In Cyprus, 2 drones heading for the RAF Akrotiri base were intercepted. And in Kuwait, 3 US fighter jets crashed after being mistakenly shot down by friendly fire from Kuwaiti forces. All 6 crew ejected safely. Jeremy Bowen reports now on day 3 of the war.
6 missiles struck Sanadaj in Iran's Kurdistan province. Official Iranian media said densely populated neighborhoods were hit. Overnight in Tehran, more civilian casualties, including children and other patients from a hospital badly damaged in a raid. This was the Gandhi hospital this morning. Israel's Prime Minister said today that they were...
To the entire United Kingdom team for the great diplomatic skill with which they conducted the Council's business last month. The provisional agenda for this meeting is maintenance of international peace and security, children, technology, and education in conflict. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with the Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo, Under-Secretary General of Political and Peace-Building Affairs, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo.
Thank you, Madam President. On behalf of the Secretary General, I want to thank you for your leadership in organizing today's discussion. This debate comes at a moment of exceptional relevance. Today, we face the highest number of armed conflicts since the Second World War. The number of civilians killed in these conflicts is the highest in decades. Our reality is clear. When conflicts erupt, children are among those most severely affected. We have been reminded of this truth over the last 2 days. Schools in Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, and Oman have closed and moved to remote learning owing to the ongoing military operations in the region. And we are aware of the reports from Iran about the death of possibly dozens of children, allegedly as the result of a strike that hit an elementary school in the town of Minab. United States authorities have announced they are looking into these reports. Globally, 1 in every 5 children is living in or fleeing a conflict zone. This adds up to 473 million children. Grave violations against children, verified by the United Nations, increased by a staggering 25% from 2023 to 2024. Rape and other forms of sexual violence rose by 35%. These horrific figures should impel us to do more to protect children in conflict. I pay tribute to the First Lady of the United States for her work to give visibility to the issue of children in conflict, and particularly for her personal engagement to reunite Ukrainian children with their families. Madam President, when conflicts do not rob children of their life and physical security, they deprive them of the right to have a quality education and a future of opportunities. 234 million children in crisis and conflict situations currently need educational support. 85 million are completely out of school. In violent conflicts, schools can be one of the only safe spaces that protect children from recruitment, trafficking, and exploitation. Schools can safeguard health and hygiene, provide psychosocial support, and connect families to essential services. Education in conflict zones is life-saving and life-sustaining. And yet schools, teachers, and education infrastructure...
Well, let's get the very latest from Tel Aviv and join our Middle East correspondent, Hugo Beshega. Hugo, we were seeing in Jeremy's report how deadly that missile that got through really was inside Israel. What's the latest where you are?
Yeah, Ben, so it was a relatively quieter day in Israel today compared with the last 2 days. We did hear the air raid sirens here in Tel Aviv multiple times today, but there were no reports of direct hits by Iranian missiles. So I think the headline today really is that this is a conflict that is expanding, and it is expanding not only because of the attacks by Israel and the US, but also because of the attacks by Iran in response to these airstrikes. We've seen that, there was the fear of countries in this region that they had shared this concern with President Trump that any kind of attack on Iran could lead to a wider regional conflict. And this is exactly what is happening now. Countries in the Gulf like Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, all of them considered safe in a very unstable region, have been under attack. Today we saw some energy facilities being hit, and this means that people away from this region are likely to feel the impact of this conflict because of rising energy costs. And now Lebanon also being dragged into this conflict with Hezbollah. So a conflict that is expanding. Earlier today we heard from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who was in the town of Bet Shemesh, where yesterday 9 people were killed when an Iranian missile hit a synagogue where people were sheltering. This is the deadliest attack in Israel in this conflict so far. And again, the indication that the Prime Minister gave is that this is likely to be a prolonged conflict. Again, he talked about removing the existential threat, as he put it, posed by Iran. So it is likely that we're talking about weeks, not days, in this conflict.
Hugo, thank you very much indeed. Hugo mentioning there how Lebanon has been dragged into this war. So let's go straight to Beirut and join our Middle East correspondent, Wira Davis, who is there for us. And quite a large number of people killed there in the last 24 hours, Wira.
Yeah, Ben, it's been a day of pretty frenetic, kinetic activity, not just here in the capital, but also in parts of southern Lebanon, both areas which are known to be Hezbollah strongholds. Israel has been quite deliberately and quite methodically attacking both individuals, named individuals, and Hezbollah infrastructure in those areas. And according to the Lebanese government, the Lebanese health ministry, more than 50 people have been killed today. Another constant presence you may be able to hear overhead is the drone. Well, that's presumably an Israeli drone, and it's been up there most of the day, or other ones like it, gathering intelligence, targeting leaders of Hezbollah and other organisations as well. There was a senior figure from Islamic Jihad who was reportedly assassinated or killed by an Israeli airstrike today. So all of this started really when Hezbollah, which of course is a close religious but also military ally of the Islamic regime in Tehran, vowed to respond to the assassination of the supreme leader in Tehran. It did that by firing some missiles or rockets across the border into Israel. Israel has responded with an iron fist, really, killing more than 50 people. And I think the worrying thing for the Lebanese government and for the people of Lebanon is that this will now escalate over the next few days and weeks, and that Lebanon will end up in another costly, divisive war with Israel, because Israel basically doesn't trust the Lebanese government to fully be able to dismantle Hezbollah. So Israel is going to take it upon itself to do that job.
OK, Wira, thank you very much indeed. Wira Davis there in Beirut. And we've just been hearing from Amir Saeed Iravani, who is the Iranian ambassador to the United Nations, who's just made this statement.
On 28 February 2026, the United States, in full coordination with Israel, launched a second deliberate and unprovoked military attack against the Islamic Republic of Iran. This was a calculated act of aggression. Major cities and densely populated civilian areas were targeted. Hundreds of innocent civilians lost their lives, many more were wounded. This is a flagrant violation of the Charter of the United Nations, especially Article 2, Paragraph 4, which strictly prohibits the threat or use of force against the sovereignty and territorial integrity of any state. It is a direct assault on the foundations of international law.
That was Iran's ambassador to the United Nations. Let's go now to Kashaya Junaidi, who's in our Washington bureau. He's from BBC Persian, the Persian language service of BBC News, which is used by some 24 million people around the world, the majority of them in Iran, despite it being blocked and routinely jammed by the Iranian authorities. What have you been hearing about the response to all of this from ordinary Iranians?
Well, it's really hard to hear from Iran because communications are almost cut. Not much information is coming out of the country. But those people that I've tried to connect and talk to, from what I've noticed, their main concern now is like the lack of communications. Internet is very slow. They can't have access to information. News channels have been jammed. But one thing that I have to mention is that as we are witnessing the continuous bombardment of regime infrastructure in Tehran and other parts of the country, including western Iran in the Kurdistan province, city of Sanandaj and other places, we've been seeing pictures and we're receiving information of civilian infrastructure also being hit, houses, hospitals, schools. On the first day of the war, a school was hit in Minab. The government says more than 100 girl students were killed in that attack. That number needs to be verified, but from the photos that came out and the verification that's been done, the location that was hit was a school for girl students. In Tehran, a hospital called Gandhi was hit, which was close to one of the offices of the government's TV station, and the hospital was heavily damaged. Houses around the hospital were heavily damaged, and as the bombardment of police stations and police facilities in Tehran carried on, these facilities, these police stations, are located in residential areas. So we've seen pictures and videos of homes being damaged and destroyed. At the same time, in Kurdistan, in Sanandaj and other places where army bases, IRGC bases have been bombed, we've heard stories of political prisoners who are in prisons inside those bases. There were also being concerns about the safety and health of these people. So it's becoming, we're getting more pictures, more information about the attacks as the war carries on. But at the same time, the government is trying to show a picture of its loyal supporters gathering in main squares of the cities in Tehran and other places, mourning the leader of the Islamic Republic, Ali Khamenei, and showing support for the regime. What they are not showing is the high number of people who poured onto the streets of Tehran and other cities in the country, risking their lives, celebrating the death of Ali Khamenei, chanting slogans, dancing on the streets, and that's something that's been not been shown on state media.
OK, thank you very much, Kashaya Junaidi there from BBC Persian. And we can go to Washington for the latest from there now and join our State Department correspondent, Tom Bateman. Tom, we heard from President Trump a little earlier. He's given various different aims for this war on Iran, hasn't he? But I suppose he has to... He said he isn't going to get bored of the war, but he has to sell it to the American people.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen in 48 hours, really, Ben, the stated objective shift, basically, from when the president was down at Mar-a-Lago on Saturday, calling for the Iranian people to take over their own government at the end of the American military operation, to something quite different today, much narrower in focus. There was no mention from the president himself of that. And from Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, we heard about the objective being to destroy Iran's conventional capabilities, its conventional missile capabilities, and destroy its navy, he said. But once again, there was no explicit sense that this was now about regime change. In fact, he said this was not about regime change, even though he said the regime had changed in some senses, of course, by which he means the killing of the supreme leader. What's going to happen here on Capitol Hill in the next hour? We're expecting the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, to show up and to give the first briefing since this operation began to the 4 members of Congress that make up the leaderships of the Republicans and the Democrats in both the House and the Senate, as particularly Democrats now pushing for a vote under the War Powers Resolution to try and curb the president's powers. That expected later this week, but that critical briefing coming behind closed doors to them we expect in the next hour.
Tom, thank you very much for that update. Tom Bateman there, our State Department correspondent on Capitol Hill. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Welcome back to our special coverage of the US and Israeli war with Iran. And we can speak now to Elliot Abrahams, who's former envoy to Iran under the first Trump administration, now Senior Fellow for Middle Eastern Studies at the Centre for Foreign Relations. Elliot, thanks very much for being with us. We were hearing from the President earlier talking about the aims of this war, but he stated various different aims for this attack on Iran, everything from regime change to trying to stop the nuclear and ballistic threat. What do you think is the aim of the war?
I think that's the minimal aim of the war. A nuclear, missile, naval attacks, Iran being a threat to its neighbors. I think the president will adjust the goals. If he thinks there can be regime change, he'll say the goal is regime change. If he thinks that there is a diplomatic way out after a week or two, he may agree to that. I think the timing is completely up in the air. I mean, you wouldn't expect him as a military matter to say we will stop in 5 days. So that we just don't know.
And how winnable is this war, do you think? And what are the chances that when he did talk about regime change, the people will rise up against the regime there?
Well, whether people will rise up, I think, is a key and very difficult question, because they rose up recently and thousands of them were slaughtered. So it takes quite a bit of courage for an Iranian to go out in the streets. Some have, but one of the goals of this campaign is to reduce the ability of the mechanisms of repression to repress the Iranian people. And I think we're doing that. Whether it will be possible to do it sufficiently, I don't know. But of course, there are timelines that go beyond this war. If the regime were overthrown, for example, not now, but a year from now or 2 years from now, I think we would all have to agree that this war brought that date closer.
We've seen this war spreading in the last 24 hours alone, haven't we? Lebanon now involved with Hezbollah and Israel, Iran lashing out at some of the Gulf states. Does that surprise you? Does that worry you? Do you think that will continue? On
Hezbollah, it's a bit of a surprise because it's really foolish. That is, there was no reason to bring Lebanon into this war. The Lebanese don't want to. The government of Lebanon has said this is illegal and must stop immediately. So that's just an error on Hezbollah's part that is bringing Lebanon into this and will end up damaging Hezbollah. On the attacks by Iran on the Gulf states, I think the Iranians have a theory, which is we will hurt the Gulf states. They will go to President Trump and say, oh, stop the war. We are being hurt. But I think that's not going to work. I think rather that they want to get back at Iran for this. They want the war to continue. until the point at which this regime cannot do that kind of thing with a massive missile program. So I think what the Iranians have done there is actually bringing the Gulf nations together, and together with the United States and Israel. I mean, the Saudi-Emirati gap fight that we've all been talking about for a month or two seems to be over for the moment.
Elliot Abrahams, thank you very much indeed, former envoy to Iran under the first Trump administration. Thank you for your time. Now, we can also speak about the situation in Lebanon, which Elliot just was talking about, and Hezbollah, and speak to Hilal Khashan, who's a professor of political science at the American University of Beirut, an analyst of Middle Eastern affairs. Thank you for being with us. Well, Hezbollah involved in this spreading fighting, but, I mean, how weakened is Hezbollah? Because it's been badly hit, hasn't it, in the last year or so by Israel already?
Yes, Hezbollah has been severely battered by the Israelis. But let's keep in mind, Shiism is a hierarchical faith, unlike Sunnism. And Hezbollah people have a religious obligation to implement the commandments of their superiors in Tehran. That's why they joined the war, as foolish as it might seem.
But you're not surprised, are you, that the Hezbollah, sort of as the proxy of Iran, launched the attacks on Israel that we've seen in the last couple of days?
No, I wasn't surprised. I mean, I didn't expect them not to do it, because after all, let's keep in mind, Hezbollah is an Iranian creation. And it was unthinkable that they would refrain from implementing a dictate by their superiors in Tehran. I mean, this goes without saying. It might seem unlikely to a Western rational mind, but in the Middle East, things are different.
And what then is the reaction of ordinary people in Lebanon to that? I mean, do they feel that yet again they're being dragged into another war? Do they think perhaps finally this will finish off Hezbollah in Lebanon?
I would say that the majority of the Lebanese are strongly opposed to Hezbollah's involvement in this round of fighting. They think Hezbollah has brought nothing but devastation to the country over the past few years. Now, even among Lebanese Shiites, whose opposition to Hezbollah is muted, many of them think that this war was uncalled for, and Hezbollah's involvement in it would further increase their misery. Hundreds of thousands of Southerners have moved from their locations in South Lebanon and the southern suburbs of Beirut, seeking refuge in schools, and many of them are sleeping in the open air in cold winter. So, okay. I mean, there is a position, but it is muted.
All right. Well, very good to talk to you. Thank you so much indeed. Hilal Khashan there, Professor of Political Science at the American University of Beirut. You're watching BBC News.
This is the Strait of Hormuz between Iran and the Gulf states. At its narrowest point, it's only 24 miles wide. It's a key transit route for global oil coming out of the Middle East. And as a result of the US-Israel war with Iran, there's been a dramatic change. So let's zoom in. This time-lapse, starting on the 27th of February, shows busy ship traffic through one part of the Strait of Hormuz. But over the weekend, we can see a sharp decrease in the number of ships moving through this part of the strait. Why? Because shipping is under threat due to the conflict. We've verified this video of the aftermath of a reported strike on a tanker called the Skylight in the Hormuz Strait. It occurred on Sunday, though what exactly happened to the vessel is still unclear at this stage. Now, several of the world's largest maritime insurance companies have said that they are cancelling their war risk cover for ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz. And some of the largest shipping companies have instructed vessels not to travel through the strait for now. The editor-in-chief of Lloyd's List, the Maritime Data Service, told us that it's extremely unlikely that anyone will be going into the area without insurance. So why does this matter? Well, normally around 20 million barrels of oil a day pass through the Hormuz Strait, and that 20 million barrels is around a quarter of global maritime oil flows of 76 million barrels a day, and it's around a fifth of global oil consumption of 102 million barrels a day. And that's why the global oil price did this on Sunday when trading opened, instantly spiking 10% to $82 a barrel. Now, that's a significant move, though. Zooming out, it's worth bearing in mind that it's still well below the price of more than $120 a barrel seen after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Nevertheless, a sustained global oil price spike could push up global inflation, particularly through the impact on petrol prices, and also hold back global economic growth. In 2023, the International Monetary Fund estimated that a 10% increase in oil prices could increase global inflation by 0.4 percentage points the following year, and also reduce global growth by around 0.15 percentage points. Remember, though, this analysis is based on global oil prices remaining 10% higher for a prolonged period. Donald Trump has said the conflict could last less than 4 weeks. Oil prices might fall back if hostilities abate and marine traffic is able to resume through Hormuz.
Hello again. You're watching BBC News with me, Ben Brown. A look at our latest headlines. US and Israeli attacks on Iran enter a third day. President Trump says they will continue, but he gives no clear timeline for the war. The conflict widens across the region. Lebanon now says 52 people have been killed there in Israeli strikes. The British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, allows UK bases to launch defensive attacks, but says that the United Kingdom will not be joining the American-Israeli offensive operations against Iran. Well, now it is time to talk politics. Yeah, welcome to this week's edition of The Political Context. As ever, we have Newsnight's political editor Nick Watt with me, and we're going to talk very much about the political implications of the American war on Iran. Well, because the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has worked very hard in recent months to cultivate a good relationship with Donald Trump, but there's no disguising the rift between them over the war in Iran. America's president has said he's very disappointed with Keir Starmer's response to the crisis. Initially, the Prime Minister refused to allow British bases to be used at all for attacks on Iran. Today, he told the House of Commons he will let those bases be used, but only defensively. Well, despite Mr. Trump's sharp words of criticism, Keir Starmer said it was his duty to judge what is in Britain's national interest. So, plenty to discuss with Nick, but let's start with what we heard today from the Prime Minister.
This government does not believe in regime change from the skies, and I thank him for his question. The lessons of history have taught us that it is important when we make decisions like this that we establish there is a lawful basis for what the United Kingdom is doing. That is one of the lessons from Iraq. And that there's a viable, thought-through plan with an objective that can be achieved or has a viable prospect of being achieved. That is the principles that I applied to the decisions that I made over the weekend. They're the principles I applied to the decision not to get involved in the offensive strikes of the US and Israel. They're also the principles I applied separately to the separate decision and a separate request from the US to be able to take defensive action.
Keir Starmer there, well, responding to the Prime Minister's statement, the opposition leader, Khamenei Badenoch, said the Conservative Party backs what she called necessary action taken by the United States. She accused the British government of providing no such clarity.
On Saturday, our allies in Canada and Australia immediately backed the action taken by America against this despotic regime in Tehran. And I have made it very clear that the Conservative Party also stands behind America taking this necessary action against state-sponsored terror. But over the weekend, statements from the government and the Prime Minister provided no such clarity. It was only last night that the Prime Minister finally told us that the government would allow our allies the use of our own air bases, despite it being obvious that UK interests were under imminent threat.
Khamenei Badenoch, let's go to Nick Watt then. Keir Starmer clearly very reluctant to get involved and actually being cheered by some of his own left-wingers in the party on the backbenches. It's a very different sort of Labour Prime Minister, from Tony Blair, who recently in that documentary that's airing at the moment was saying, he had to go with America. It's a different case, isn't it, for Keir Starmer? He doesn't see it like that.
Yeah, it's not Tony Blair. And as you say in that documentary on Channel 4, it does remind us that Tony Blair was in Congress for the speech by George W. Bush just after 9/11 and said, "We stand with you." And yes, stood with them in the Iraq war with all the political consequences that went with that. Very different from Keir Starmer. Interestingly, those remarks we heard from the Prime Minister saying you can't do regime change from the air came in response to a question from an MP who reminded the House of Commons that he'd voted against the Iraq war. Who's that Conservative MP? The father of the House, Edward Lee, who is a Conservative, disagreeing with his leader, Khamenei Badenoch. And that very clear line from the Prime Minister, carefully phrased, but saying the reason why he couldn't sign up to the offensive operations by the United States in Israel was on grounds of international law and there not being a viable plan for the day after.
And he is very much a man of the law, isn't he, having been a former Director of Public Prosecutions. Very keen to stick to international law on this.
Yes, and has written books about international law. And his Attorney General, Lord Hermer, Richard Hermer, is a very close legal colleague, legal friend of the Prime Minister. They will have worked very carefully on this. Essentially, Khamenei Badenoch's argument is, well, you've had two positions, no to the offensive operations, yes to the defensive operations. She's saying that's a U-turn, and Keir Starmer saying no, they are different judgment calls on different positions. But Khamenei Badenoch basically saying you should be standing by our closest ally. Keir Starmer says I will stand by the law and what is in the UK national interest.
Well, some British MPs in Parliament are demanding a vote on the use of British military bases to attack Iranian missile sites. This is what we heard from Alistair Carmichael in the House of Commons on that.
You will recall that in 2003, this House voted to support George Bush's war in Iraq, and that 10 years later then we voted against supporting Barack Obama's intervention in Syria. I believed and still believe that on both occasions we made the wrong decision, but it was of critical importance for the political and even the social cohesion of this country that these should be decisions made in this chamber.
Alistair Carmichael. So, Nick, will there be a vote?
Well, that was, I have to say, an interesting intervention by Alistair Carmichael, who, of course, the Lib Dem chief whip and the Scotland secretary during the coalition period, saying he voted for that military action over Syria 10 years ago, but obviously Parliament decided the other way. So he voted in favour of military action, but he's saying we need to have a vote. What Keir Starmer appears to be saying is there will be a debate, but you'd only have a substantive vote if UK military were involved in offensive operations like the 2003 Iraq War. What this is defensive, so that would not be vote territory, is what the Prime Minister was indicating today.
OK. Let's go back to that split then, Nick, between the Prime Minister and the American President, because Donald Trump has publicly said, as I mentioned, he isn't pleased with the UK response. And speaking to The Telegraph, he said he was, quote, very disappointed in Sir Keir Starmer for blocking him from using the base at Diego Garcia to carry out strikes on Iran. He said it took far too long for the Prime Minister to change his mind. So, Nick, you know, when Keir Starmer was talking, it sounded like he didn't agree with very much of what President Trump has said about this military operation. He doesn't believe in regime change from the sky, isn't really clear what the war aims are, doesn't really think it's legal internationally. And yet, as I mentioned, he's trying to be very close to Donald Trump. But on this, he's quite far apart from him.
I mean, Keir Starmer was choosing his words carefully to avoid exacerbating it, but he's basically saying what you did in the offensive side was against international law and you don't have a plan for the day after, was essentially what Keir Starmer was saying. Now, look, we talk about the special relationship. We're always used to spats between prime ministers and presidents. You think of Tony Blair and Kosovo trying to goad Bill Clinton into boots on the ground. You think of John Major taking exception when Bill Clinton gave a visa to Gerry Adams before the IRA ceasefire. But the significance of this is on an issue of massive substance, a military issue, and Keir Starmer is saying, no, we're not with you, and you can't use our bases in the UK and in Diego Garcia for the offensive operations. I would say on substance, you've probably got to go back to Harold Wilson saying no to Lyndon Baines Johnson, to UK troops in the Vietnam War, to get to that sort of level of disagreement on an issue of substance. But the Prime Minister obviously using careful and diplomatic language.
And although, you know, he had, you know, some accused Keir Starmer of kind of basically sucking up to Donald Trump, especially when he went to the White House and issued that invitation for the state visit, you know, with a flourish, didn't he, in the Oval Office. But they've sort of disagreed on Greenland recently and then on the Chagos Islands and now this. So is that sort of special relationship between Starmer and Trump, is it slightly fraying at the edges, do you think?
Well, it's a special relationship that is especially difficult. Keir Starmer made a strategic decision because he's a human rights lawyer and Donald Trump is a New York real estater. He made a decision, I've got to get close to him and do everything I can to get close to him. And evidently a bonding moment was when Keir Starmer, then leader of the opposition, telephoned Donald Trump after he was Prime Minister then, after the attempt on his life in Pennsylvania. And that was greatly appreciated by Donald Trump. They've also bonded because Keir Starmer lost his brother quite young. Donald Trump lost his brother quite young. So they found common ground and he did try to work hard. But there are lines for Keir Starmer, and the lines that you mention are lines that he's not going to cross.
To what extent do you think domestic political considerations are influencing Keir Starmer? Because we had that recent by-election. There was quite a big Muslim vote in that constituency. It wasn't there in Greater Manchester. And, you know, partly people's feelings, very strong feelings about Gaza and Starmer's stance on Gaza and so on. Do you think some of that is playing into his thinking strategically about where the Labour Party is at the moment on international affairs?
I'm sure here the Prime Minister has made those two big decisions. It's against international law and you don't have a plan. That is fundamentally the point. But, yes, and it all gets back to the Iraq War and it all gets back to Tony Blair. In the Labour Party, nobody needs any reminding of what the Iraq War did to Tony Blair's authority. Tony Blair will go to his grave saying he did the right thing, but the Labour Party is fundamentally of the belief that he made the wrong decision. And Keir Starmer knows that that means there are limits on what you sign up to with an American president.
But, I mean, last point, I suppose, you know, Keir Starmer said, OK, defensive operations only, not offensive. I suppose some people might say, well, you know, that's quite difficult to sort of separate one from the other. It could be a slippery slope where defensive operations become offensive operations by the British military.
Yes, because essentially what you're saying is US aircraft from RAF Fairfoot and from Diego Garcia can launch a strike in Iran on a military battery that is attacking allied states like, in the Gulf. So what are we going to do? Are we going to have a team of lawyers sitting in Diego Garcia and RAF Fairfoot and saying, well, that plane can take off? But, when the Defence Secretary, approves a military strike, they do literally approve every single strike. So I imagine there's some pretty serious sort of legality going on.
Yeah, and we could have weeks and weeks of this. All right, Nick, for the moment, thank you very much. Nick Watt there. Thank you very much for your time. Just a reminder, you can hear more of Nick's analysis on BBC Newsnight. That's in just under 2 hours' time here on the BBC News Channel.
Missiles and the threat posed by their Navy, particularly to naval assets. That is what it is focused on doing right now, and it's doing quite successfully. I'll leave it to the Pentagon and the Department of War to discuss the tactics behind that and the progress that's being made. That is the clear objective of this mission. The second question that's been asked is, why now? Well, there's two reasons why now. The first is it was abundantly clear that if Iran came under attack by anyone, the United States or Israel or anyone, they were going to respond against the United States. The orders had been delegated down to the field commanders. It was automatic, and in fact, it bared to be true, because in fact, within an hour of the initial attack on the leadership compound, the missile forces in the south and in the north, for that matter, had already been activated to launch. In fact, those had already been pre-positioned. The third is the assessment that was made that if we stood and waited for that attack to come first before we hit them, we would suffer much higher casualties. And so the President made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act. Going back to the purpose. The purpose of this is to destroy that missile capability. Why does Iran want that ballistic missile capability? What they are trying to do, and have been trying to do for a very long time, is build a conventional weapons capability as a shield where they can hide behind. Meaning, there would come a point where they have so many conventional missiles, so many drones, and it can inflict so much damage that no one can do anything about their nuclear program. That is what they were trying to do, is put themselves in a place of immunity where the damage they could inflict on the region would be so high that no one can do anything about their nuclear program or their nuclear ambitions. They are producing, by some estimates, over 100 of these missiles a month. Compare that to the 6 or 7 interceptors that can be built a month. They can build 100 of these a month, not to mention the thousands of one-way attack drones that they also have. They've been doing this for a very long time, and by the way, they've been doing it under sanction. You see the attacks they're conducting right now? They're attacking airports, they're attacking hotels, they're hitting not just military bases, they're attacking our embassies directly, they're attacking facilities that have nothing to do with war or with military, and that's a weakened Iran. That's in Iran despite years of sanction. Imagine a year from now, or a year and a half from now, the capabilities they would have to inflict damage on us. It's an unacceptable risk, especially in the hands of a regime that's run by radical clerics. The Ayatollah was a radical cleric. That entire regime is led by radical clerics who don't make geopolitical decisions. They make decisions on the basis of theology, their view of theology, which is an apocalyptic one. That has to be taken very seriously as well. So that was the purpose for what this operation is all about. That's what it's focused on. As the President said earlier today, it is on or ahead of schedule. I will defer to the Department of War to discuss the progress being made at a tactical level, but it was the right decision and an important decision for the safety and security of the world.
Does Congress have to weigh in? Does Congress have to weigh in? Is the President declaring war, and does Congress have to weigh in? And was there an imminent threat? Did you tell lawmakers that there was an imminent threat?
There absolutely was an imminent threat, and the imminent threat was that we knew that if Iran was attacked, and we believed they would be attacked, that they would immediately come after us. And we were not going to sit there and absorb a blow before we responded, because the Department of War assessed that if we did that, if we waited for them to hit us first after they were attacked, and by someone else, Israel attacked them, they hit us first, and we waited for them to hit us, we would suffer more casualties and more deaths. We went proactively in a defensive way to prevent them from inflicting higher damage. Had we not done so, there would have been hearings on Capitol Hill about how we knew that this was going to happen, and we didn't act preemptively to prevent more casualties and more loss of life.
Was forced to strike because of an impending Israeli action?
No, two things I would say. Number one is, no matter what, ultimately this operation needed to happen. That's the question of why now. But this operation needed to happen because Iran, in about a year or a year and a half, would cross the line of immunity, meaning they would have so many short-range missiles, so many drones, that no one could do anything about it because they could hold the whole world hostage. Look at the damage they're doing now. And this is a weakened Iran. Imagine a year from now. So that had to happen. Obviously, we were aware of Israeli intentions and understood what that would mean for us, and we had to be prepared to act as a result of it. But this had to happen no matter what.
Secretary, President Trump said overnight that his top choices to now run Iran were killed in the strikes. Does the United States have a firm plan for how they intend to handle this power vacuum in Iran to ensure that an Iranian hardliner does not take power?
So two things, and two things can be true. Number one is our mission and our focus is the destruction of their ballistic missile capabilities and their ability to manufacture them, as well as the threat posed by their Navy to global shipping. That's our objective. That said, we would not mind, we would not be heartbroken, and we hope that the Iranian people can overthrow this government and establish a new future for that country. We would love for that to be possible. But the objective of this mission is the destruction of their ballistic missile capabilities and of their naval capabilities.
Secretary, so are you saying, based on that, are you saying that there is no responsibility, no plan for the U.S. to at least play a role in whatever government comes next?
We might. We'll see how circumstances play out. But I'm telling you what the objectives of this operation are. The objectives of this operation are to destroy their ballistic missile capability and make sure they can't rebuild it, and make sure that they can't hide behind that to have a nuclear program. That's the objective of the mission. That said, abundantly clear, we would love for there to be an Iran that's not governed by radical Shia clerics. As I've said myself repeatedly for years, the leadership of that country does not reflect the people of Iran, and I think that's been pretty apparent in the protests that you've seen. If there's something we can do to help them down the road, we'd obviously be open to it, but that's not the objective. The objective of this mission is the destruction of their ballistic missile capabilities.
Regime change has not gone well for the United States.
The what now?
Regime change has not gone well for the United States for many, many decades. How do you assure the American public that things will not get worse for the next regime that comes in there and replaces the actual?
We would love to see this regime be replaced. And ultimately, as the President has said, he calls... No, but let me finish my answer. As the President has said, he would love for the people of Iran to use this as an opportunity to rise up and remove these leaders. They've been wanting to remove them from a long time. We've seen successive waves of protests, and we've seen them slaughter people. Okay? But the objective of this mission is to make sure they don't have these weapons that can threaten us and our allies in the region. That's why we're doing what we're doing now. And while we would love to see a new regime, the bottom line is no matter who governs that country a year from now, they're not going to have these ballistic missiles and they're not going to have these drones to threaten us. That's the objective of this mission, is to deny them the ability to use ballistic missiles to threaten their neighbors, to threaten our bases, to threaten our presence in the region, and ultimately as a shield behind which they can do whatever they want with their nuclear weapons ambition. We were not going to let them hide behind that, and that's why this was such a critical mission to undertake now while they were at their weakest point, and not a year from now where they could inflict even more damage and perhaps already be behind that point of immunity. Go right here behind. Go ahead, you and then you. Yes.
Your critics in Congress have said that they should have
a role. They should be able to weigh in here. And there are going to be war powers resolutions votes in Congress later this week. Why not notify Congress ahead of this? And does Congress...
Well, we did. We notified Congress. I mean, we notified the Gang of Eight. We notified congressional leadership. There's no law that requires us to do that. The law says we have to notify them 48 hours after beginning hostilities. We've done that. I think the notification went today. But we did notify members of Congress in advance. But we can't notify 535 members of Congress. And, well, the Congress can vote on whatever they want, but there's no law that requires us to do that. And I want to say something because I see people on TV. Look, that's fine. If they want to take a war powers vote, they can do that. They've done that. They've done that a bunch of times. But there's no, people keep saying that there's no law that requires the president to have done anything with regards to this. To begin with, no presidential administration has ever accepted the War Powers Act as constitutional. Not Republican presidents, not Democratic presidents. That said, we have followed the notification at 48 hours. We're here today. I've done more Gang of Eight briefings than I got in the 4 years that Biden was president and I was a member of the Gang of Eight. All of that said, we've complied with the law 100%. And we're going to continue to comply with it. We've done the notification, and we officially to Congress, but we did notify members of Congress. We just can't notify 535 people. That's not possible, but we did the Gang of Eight twice. I briefed them last week, and then I called them the night before the operation.
Secretary, can you tell us what you know, Mr. Secretary, what the administration knows about the strike in the building in southern Iran? The Iranians are saying that the school reports of large numbers of schools, including children.
Yeah, I've seen those reports. I would refer you, not because I'm not trying to answer your question, but I don't want to get it wrong. The Department of War would be investigating that if that was our strike, and I would refer your question to them, and I'll make sure they're aware that you have that question. But we'd like to know. Well, clearly the United States would not deliberately target a school. Our objectives are missiles, both the ability to manufacture them and the ability to launch them, and the one-way attract drones. That would be our focus, and that's what we would be focused on. We would have no interest and, frankly, no incentive to target civilian infrastructure. The Iranians are, on the other hand, targeting civilian infrastructure. You guys have seen it. I'm sure you've seen it. They're hitting hotels. They're hitting embassies. They're hitting airports. They're hitting oil infrastructure. Well, it'd be very tragic, but I can't speak to the details behind it because I just don't have it. It would be a tragic outcome if it's happened. I don't have the details as to what led to it. But what is clear is that the United States would not deliberately target a school. They are, on the other hand, deliberately targeting civilians, as you've seen, because you know why? They are a terroristic regime. They sponsor terrorism and they participate in terrorism.
What's your message to Americans who are concerned about rising energy prices given the spiking of oil prices today?
Yes, and we knew that going in would be a factor, and so we have a program in place that will begin to be implemented by Secretary Wright, Secretary Bessent. We talked about it last night, again, about this program. We talked this morning, and starting tomorrow you will see us rolling out those phases to try to mitigate against that. Obviously, markets are going to be reacting to news about what's happening. And again, a reminder, think about it, okay? This terroristic regime, led by radical clerics, has the ability, potentially, to shut off 20% of global energy. That's the kind of leverage they have because of their Navy. We're going to destroy their Navy. But there is a plan in place. We anticipated this could be an issue, and Secretary Wright and Bessent will begin to roll out those steps starting tomorrow to mitigate against the impact that could have. I got to do this briefing, so I got a couple more. Yeah.
Do you anticipate putting boots on the ground, and how long do you anticipate the conflict to last?
Well, we don't. Let me say two things about it. Number one, the president always has the options to undertake whatever operations he decides to do as the commander-in-chief. That said, we believe the objective that we have set for this mission, which is the destruction of their ballistic missile capabilities, both launch capability and manufacturing, can be achieved without ground forces. Right now, we're not postured for ground forces, but obviously the president has those options. He's never going to rule out anything. But right now, our focus is on the destruction of their ballistic missile launchers, their ballistic missile stockpiles, and their ballistic missile manufacturing capability, as well as their one-way attract drones and their Navy, because of the threat it poses to global shipping.
How long
Right, I can only do one more. Right there in the middle. Yes, sir.
Is there a diplomatic exchange going on right now between U.S. and Iran? Any exchanges whatsoever outside of
No, not at this time. I mean, look, we always have people that reach out from inside of governments. You don't know if they're authorized to reach out or not. They're suffering a tremendous amount of damage. Honestly, again, I'm not going to give away the details of our tactical efforts, but the hardest hits are yet to come from the U.S. military. The next phase will be even more punishing on Iran than it is right now. Someone was screaming, how long will it take? I don't know how long it'll take. We have objectives. We will do this as long as it takes to achieve those objectives, and we will achieve those objectives. The world will be a safer place when we're done with this operation. All right? Thank you, guys. Thank you.
How can that be a mistake?
Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, saying that this operation against Iran, well, we'll do it as long as it takes, he says, to fulfill our objectives. And he was really justifying the war against Iran by saying that they have been building in Iran 100 missiles a month. And it was an unacceptable risk to wait for them to build more, said Marco Rubio. He said it was a right and important decision for the safety of the world to attack Iran. He said Iran was a year and a half away from holding the world hostage. It was an imminent threat as well. And in terms of regime change, he said we would love the Iranian people to rise up and overthrow the Iranian regime. He said he hoped for that to happen. But the main reason he gave for the start of the operation against Iran was the fact that it was an imminent risk in terms of its missile building capability and the fact that it had built so many missiles, and that he said even now in a weakened state it was lashing out and attacking targets nearby, just showing just what a dangerous regime it is. And he said it had a theocracy with an apocalyptic view of the world. Well, let's just sum up where we are then on day 3 of the conflict, because President Trump has said today that his war against Iran is ahead of schedule. He was speaking at the White House. He said the US military campaign Epic Fury is aimed at eliminating the threat from what he called a terrorist regime. His Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, insisted it will not be an endless war. Now, Iran has staged retaliatory strikes right across the Middle East after the killing of its supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, while the United States and Israel have both continued their offensive against Iranian targets. Israeli jets have been focused on the capital, Tehran, with major explosions reported there. The Iranian Red Crescent saying more than 550 people have been killed. And today the war spread. Now Lebanon has been drawn into the conflict, with the health ministry there saying at least 52 people have been killed in Israeli strikes. Israel responding to attacks by the Iranian-backed Shia militant group Hezbollah. For its part, Iran has hit energy sites such as the oil refinery in Saudi Arabia, and also a major gas plant in Qatar. Global oil and gas prices have now risen sharply as well. In Cyprus, meanwhile, 2 drones heading for the RAF Akrotiri base were intercepted, and in Kuwait, 3 US fighter jets crashed after being mistakenly shot down by friendly fire from Kuwaiti forces. All 6 crew ejected safely. Well, coming up, we'll have all the very latest from the region, but first, some of the most dramatic images of the continuing war in Iran and the Middle East.
Right from the beginning, we projected 4 to 5 weeks, but we have capability to go far longer than that.
We didn't start this war, but under President Trump, we are finishing it.
We are not joining the strikes, but we will continue our defensive actions in the region.
Our senior commanders are on this constantly. I'm in constant contact with them.
Constantly trying to eradicate Israel. This plan no longer exists.
Hello and welcome to The Context USA with me, Katrina Perry in Washington.
And with me, Ben Brown, here in London. And tonight we're focusing on the continuing US and Israeli offensive against Iran. President Trump says the attacks will continue but gives no clear timeline.
This was our last best chance to strike what we're doing right now and eliminate the intolerable threats posed by this sick and sinister regime. And they are indeed sick and sinister.
This was a calculated act of aggression. Major cities and densely populated civilian areas were targeted. Hundreds of innocent civilians lost their lives.
Countries in the Gulf like Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, all of them considered safe in a very unstable region, have been under attack.
We have something much wider and something that, frankly, in my years of covering this region, we have never seen before. Fires literally in so many parts of the Middle East.
Putting all of this in context for us tonight on our panel, Rina Shah, geopolitical strategist and former senior Republican congressional advisor, and Mo Alithi, Democratic strategist and executive director of the Georgetown Institute of Politics and Public Service. Hello and welcome to The Context USA, where we always spend this hour discussing the main issues going on here in Washington in US politics. And of course, today, all eyes on the Middle East following a weekend that saw the US and Israel launch airstrikes on Iran that decapitated its leadership, but has thrown the wider region into turmoil. In just the past few hours, President Trump has said the big wave, as he called it, in the war against Iran is yet to come.
Yeah, and there's been a significant escalation of the conflict, with Iran staging retaliatory strikes across the Middle East following the killing of its supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. In a moment, we'll bring you up to date with the very latest on the situation as it stands. But first, let's just take a listen to what President Trump said a little earlier on today about the operation entitled Epic Fury.
This was our last best chance to strike what we're doing right now and eliminate the intolerable threats posed by this sick and sinister regime. And they are indeed sick and sinister. Our objectives are clear. First, we're destroying Iran's missile capabilities, and you see that happening on an hourly basis, and their capacity to produce brand new ones, and pretty good ones they make. Second, we're annihilating their navy. We've knocked out already 10 ships. They're at the bottom of the sea. Third, we're ensuring that the world's #1 sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon. Never going to have a nuclear weapon. I said that from the beginning. They're never going to have a nuclear weapon. They were on the road to getting one legitimately through a deal that was signed foolishly by our country. And finally, we're ensuring that the Iranian regime cannot continue to arm, fund, and direct terrorist armies outside of their borders. And we thought we had a deal, but then they backed out. And they came back, and we thought we had a deal, and they backed out. I said, you can't deal with these people. You've got to do it the right way.
That was President Trump a little earlier on today. Let's just bring you up to date with some of the latest developments. Of course, the situation changing by the hour. But the US and Israel have been continuing their attacks on Iranian targets. Israel's military says it's been focusing on the Iranian capital, Tehran, with big explosions reported there.
The campaign has now widened to Lebanon. The health ministry there saying at least 52 people have been killed in Israeli strikes. Israel says it was responding to attacks from the Iran-backed Lebanese militant group Hezbollah.
And Iran has continued to hit back at states across the Middle East, targeting energy sites, including an oil refinery in Saudi Arabia and a major gas plant in Qatar. Global oil and gas prices have now risen very steeply.
We'll talk about that a little later in the programme. Also in Cyprus, 2 drones heading for a UK base were intercepted today. That follows a drone attack last night, which hit the runway at the RAF Akrotiri base.
And in Kuwait, 3 US fighter planes have been shot down in what the American military says was an apparent friendly fire incident. This footage showing one plane as it plummeted to the ground.
Meanwhile, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is currently on Capitol Hill as we speak, briefing leaders of the Senate and the House of Representatives on those strikes on Iran.
Yeah, Mr. Rubio spoke to reporters on his way into the briefing, so let's have a listen to what he's just been saying.
Our mission and our focus is the destruction of their ballistic missile capabilities and their ability to manufacture them, as well as the threat posed by their Navy to global shipping. That's the objective. That said, we would not mind, we would not be heartbroken, and we hope that the Iranian people can overthrow this government and establish a new future for that country. We would love for that to be possible. But the objective of this mission is the destruction of their ballistic missile capabilities and of their naval capabilities.
Let's go live to Capitol Hill now and speak to our State Department correspondent, Tom Bateman, who was there at that little gaggle just now with the Secretary Rubio. Tom, the clip we just played there, really one of the key clips from what Marco Rubio said, and a very clear outlining of just what the US mission is here in Iran.
Yeah, I think we've seen, 48 hours into this, Katrina, the administration come out with what has sounded like, from their perspective, a much more sort of unified message about what they're trying to say this was about. But frankly, that has shifted a lot from what President Trump said at the outset on Saturday, when there was basically a call for people to take over the Iranian government. Now you're hearing a different message. Mr. Rubio began that short press conference by saying he didn't know what all the confusion was. Our objective is fundamentally clear. He says it's about eliminating Iran's short-range ballistic missile capability, its conventional missile and weaponry, that the administration is now saying was being used as a shield to develop a nuclear capability, even though, of course, the administration had said that had been obliterated in the airstrikes of the summer of last year. And he also went on to answer the question about why now, and there was something of a curious answer to that. He said that this was a preemptive defense because the Americans knew that if Iran was attacked by Israel, he was suggesting, that the Iranians would then attack American positions. And so this was a sort of preemptive defense against a contingency against Iran being attacked by the US's ally and then attacking American positions. So that was what he said here. I also asked him the question about the attack on the building that we saw images of over the weekend. The Iranians saying a school hit on Saturday in southern Iran, and many, many dozens of civilians, up to 150 in some of the numbers that the Iranian authorities have been putting out, suggesting had been killed, including school children. I asked Mr. Rubio about that. I said, what did the administration know? Was this an American missile? He said that basically that was with the Pentagon, that it's being looked into, but if, he said, children have been killed, it would be a tragedy, but no admission at this stage, certainly, that was an American missile. He said if it was something that the Pentagon was looking into.
And Tom, just to interrupt you there for a moment, because we do have an update coming to us from CENTCOM, as it's known, the Central Command in the region of the US military, confirming in a statement just now that as at a few moments ago, they're confirming 6 US service members have now been killed in action. The most recent tally we had before that was 4 this morning. And the CENTCOM spokesperson says US forces recently recovered the remains of 2 previously unaccounted for service members from a facility that was struck during Iran's initial attacks in the region. And the spokesperson saying, as indeed we heard from the president, major combat operations continue and they are withholding the identities of these 6 individuals until their next of kin has been notified. And Tom, that brings the question of the level of risk here to US military, which both the Secretary of Defense and the President have acknowledged exists, that there will be fatalities. That's the nature of war, the President said. But Secretary Rubio just saying right now that an option of ground forces is not an option that's currently on the table.
Yeah, and I mean, Pete Hegseth, the Defence Secretary, was asked about that also at the Pentagon this morning, about ground forces, the potential for any invasion. He was a bit less, he was a bit more equivocal about it, I felt, actually, Mr. Hegseth, because he said he wouldn't give away any kind of military plans. His position was very much this was not going to be a, quote, forever war, an endless war. Very much the thing, of course, that Mr. Trump had campaigned on in the three elections he ran in, that this would not be a return to foreign entanglements in the Middle East, something that he had very much laid into his predecessors about, particularly over Iraq. And so, but the point is about this, Katrina, is, we've been talking about there are key parts of the Republican base within the MAGA movement who are now crying betrayal because they see this, both the way this has been done and the scope for this igniting a far greater conflagration in the entire region now. They see this as Mr. Trump backtracking on that fundamental promise about America first, an end to foreign military adventurism, and particularly in the Middle East. And all of that also now playing into the way in which, whether or not there was a proper debate in the run-up to this, as there was, for example, in the run-up to the Iraq War. George W. Bush went to Congress, got an authorization for the use of force there. This hasn't happened this time. Democrats are in a clamour about that fact, some Republicans, but at the moment it doesn't look like Democrats have anything like the numbers across the board they would need to get that war resolution vote through Congress here.
Nevertheless, it is tabled for a little bit later this week, so we'll keep our eye out for that. Tom Bateman there at the US State Department, thank you very much.
Let's talk some of this through with our panel. We've got Rina Shah, geopolitical strategist and former senior Republican congressional advisor, and Mo Alithi, Democratic strategist. Rina, let's just start with you. We're hearing from Tom there that the reasons for this US offensive have shifted a little bit. Donald Trump at the beginning was talking about regime change, wanting the Iranian people to rise up against their rulers. Now it's very much about stopping the Iranian ballistic missile program. What's your view? What do you think are the reasons for this war?
Well, I'm somebody who has long advocated for a very strong and principled U.S. foreign policy, and that's one that prioritizes American interests, also deters aggression, and avoids the pitfalls of endless nation building. I'm not exactly a supporter of this president, but I am still a Republican. However, I have to give credit where it's due on this Iran operation. I think taking out the supreme leader, Khamenei, and crippling their missile and naval capabilities was a bold and necessary strike after decades of Tehran sponsoring terror, threatening allies of ours like Israel, and destabilizing the region. I mean, we're talking 47 years here. The Ayatollahs have waged asymmetrical warfare against the West, whether it's hostage crises or proxy attacks. And last year's nuclear program takedown was not enough to stop their conventional buildup. So I think what I'm looking at today, as I hear from the administration members, is that this isn't about regime change fantasies. It's more so, however, about targeted retribution that really aligns with conservative realism. And I think we ought to also factor in protecting our troops and partners and send a very clear message that threats won't be tolerated. But that said, I'm also watching closely for signs of mission creep. Pete Hegseth's assurance that this is not Iraq, this is not endless. I think that rings true in theory, but with no boots on the ground and a focus on air and cyber dominance, that's fine. However, we've got history that teaches us humility here. And of course, casualties are mounting. So a lot of confusion here stateside, a lot of nervousness. You hear it in my voice. I am supportive of the president's actions, but I do worry about the road ahead because I know that quick wins protect our economy and our security, but that prolonged involvement risks all of that.
And just bring Mo in here on this. Mo, when we're talking about that war powers resolution and the whole debate about whether the president did or didn't have the authority to do what he has done, nevertheless, it's the case that the US is in it now. And with the president talking about this lasting for 4 to 5 weeks, what sort of power does Congress have?
Well, Congress can reassert its authority as granted under the U.S. Constitution and pass an authorization or not pass an authorization. That is entirely in the purview of Congress. Now, the push and pull between the executive branch and the legislative branch is not new, and it's not limited to one party. But Congress does and should have a role here. And the reason it's important is because, look, I am not going to shed one tear over the death of the supreme leader, brutal dictator who has killed far too many people around the world and in Iran. But for us to go in with this level of military force and decapitate this regime, changing the rationale, we've heard, 6, 7 different reasons why this was important over the past few days. The president needs to go to the American people and needs to go to the Congress and get them on board with this strategy to illustrate what the strategy even is. Because Rena's absolutely right. There is a real concern about mission creep if the mission is not laid out clearly. We've decapitated the regime, but we don't know what happens next. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, we have seen what happens when we decapitate a regime with no plan for what comes next. And that's something we should all be concerned about. Congress should have a voice in this.
OK, Mo, thank you. And Rena, thank you. We're going to be discussing this much more in the next few minutes. But we're going to take a short break now. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Well, let's talk more then about the war in Iran with Tara Kangalu, who's global affairs journalist, adjunct professor at Georgetown University and author of the book Heartbeat of Iran. Thank you very much for being with us. I mean, one of the central questions that Donald Trump talked about at the beginning was hoping that the people of Iran would rise up, take this opportunity, seize this opportunity. What do you think are the chances of that?
Indeed. And I think as we talk about airstrikes and military might in the region, and as the Israeli and American forces are really pounding Tehran and other major cities, in the words of people that I've been in touch with, it's vital to remember that we're talking about a nation of 90 million. Iran is not a monolithic society that has for long been desperate, many of them, the majority, for change. When you look at the Iranian public right now, so many of them are jubilant. They're happy to see the death of a man they call a dictator, responsible for the repression, oppression and choking of a nation for more than 30 years. But then equally, the question of what's next for them is high up in their minds, and it's what's keeping them up at night at a time that, again, these strikes are continuing full force. And in today's speech by the president, we actually did not hear any word of the Iranian people and his plan for the day after. And again, that is an important question. It's a vital question that we oftentimes missed in the region, and we saw the ramifications of that for the years to come. And I am extremely worried that the day will come when the military altercations would end and the people of Iran are faced with an even worse situation.
And I mean, you talk about 90 million people, but there are still within the regime a lot of men with guns and weapons. And it's very hard to see how the civilian population can just rise up without weapons, without guns, against the Revolutionary Guard, against the people who have been oppressing them for so many years.
Indeed, and that's what we saw, Ben, earlier in January. People came on the streets in the thousands across the country, and many thousands were killed, many thousands were injured, and of course detained. Right now, if I may, by the way, I think it's vital for the international community to pay attention to the political prisoners who are in multiple prisons in Iran right now. I'm following lines coming out. Israeli military said that they're going to hit the Evin compound, and some of Iran's brightest minds are detained, educators, lawyers, political activists. And we saw back in June that compound, that prison was hit and some civilians were hurt. And I bring that about because you're right, the Iranian people have been repressed for decades with empty hands. They have paid the price with their lives. And when you talk to ordinary Iranians, as I have been in the past few days, they say we will come on the streets if we know that we will be safe, because we want to move beyond this regime. We want to move beyond this dictatorship. They just don't know how. And I think that is the big question. Of course, the United States and Israel both have said 130 cities in the country have been hit. And in the words of the president yesterday, he said the IRGC's command and control center in multiple cities have been hit. And again, speaking with people on the ground, they're telling me that police stations, IRGC compounds, and various military hubs have been hit. But again, once the dust settles, when people come on the streets, how are they going to reclaim the government? What is that day looking like for the people of Iran? And I do believe that it's responsible for the administration to have some sort of concrete plan.
Well, yeah, just on that, and very briefly, we just have a minute or so. But, I mean, Donald Trump started off this whole thing by saying, you know, he wanted regime change. He wanted the people to rise up. He didn't really talk about that today. He talked more about the imminent threat from Iran. And Marco Rubio similarly defined the war aims as stopping Iran's missile program. Again, didn't talk about regime change. What do you think there has been a shift in the administration position?
I don't think we ever knew what the administration policy really is, and Gulf sources that I've been speaking with are also worried about that the method and the end game has been unclear. And I think the highest price, once again, would be, in this case, paid by the people of Iran. And again, speaking with people on the ground, I'm told that if the regime stays in whatever shape or form, they will most certainly be more ruthless and repressive than before. And history has shown that to us. And that's what also concerns me at this stage. And given the fact that, again, we don't have a straightforward policy and plan from the White House on what's next.
Thank you so much for being with us on BBC News. Tariq Hangalu there, Global Affairs journalist and adjunct professor at Georgetown University. Thank you very much.
Well, let's bring our panel back in here. Rina Shah, geopolitical Republican strategist, and Mo Alethi, Democratic strategist. And Mo, to you first, just on that point about what comes next inside Iran, if the administration are saying this is not about regime change, and Marco Rubio just saying there, you know, we'd love there to be an Iran that isn't run by clerics. If that's something we can help with down the road, he said, we'd be open to it, but that's not the objective. Is there a responsibility on the United States to actually provide that help, or to have thought that through, given the chain of events that they have triggered in Iran and now in the region?
Well, again, it raises my concern about the lack of a plan in place. We've seen this. We've seen this movie far too many times, where we go in, we kill the bad guy, and even worse guys pop up and take control. And so if there is no plan, the president told the protesters in Iran a few weeks ago, we have your back. What does that mean? And what does that mean right now? If the people are going to rise up and try to overthrow what's left of the regime, what does that look like? Who takes over? If they don't, then we see an emboldened regime. We see the military. We see the other hardliner clerics come back. They've already said they're going to be scorched earth from this point forward. It's a very real concern. If we're not ready, it could get much worse.
And just on that point, Rina, what responsibility is there for the US, for the administration, to deal with whatever may come?
Well, I certainly have my opinions on that, but I don't think they're thinking about the responsibilities right now because we're in the fog of an active multi-front air campaign. This Operation Epic Fury is now on day 3 with absolutely no clean off-ramp in sight as yet. So I think the administration, Trump even floating that he's projecting some 4 to 5 weeks of major combat, but also repeatedly saying it could go on far longer if needed, hasn't ruled out ground troops if necessary. So they're not thinking about what their actual responsibilities are to A, keep civilians alive, B, do right by the Iranian people there within its borders, help them see their way to determining their future, as I've heard Senator Lindsey Graham put it. There's a lot right now that is in motion, obviously, as we all know, but on the military front, that's the only place we have to really focus. I think it's astounding to see what they're talking about when they talk about being laser focused. I'm talking about Hegseth and the Joint Chiefs. They want to destroy these ballistic missiles. They want to cripple the Navy, ensure that there's no nukes. You know, the sites are reportedly untouched, or there's rubble from prior operations. So the real big thing, though, I think for voters, for Republican voters, is to avoid endless boots on the ground, that kind of quagmire. But the reality on the ground is widening very fast.
OK, Rina Shah, thank you very much indeed, and Mo Alethi too. We'll be talking to you much more about the war in Iran and also American public opinion in terms of the recent polling that there has been done about the US military operations in Iran. That's coming up. Do stay tuned. You're watching BBC News.
On a third day of coordinated strikes by Israel and the US across Iran, the war has already pulled in several other countries across the region. At BBC Verify, we've been continuing to analyse and verify dozens of videos and pinpoint exactly which locations have been hit. US and Israeli strikes have hit targets across Iran. Iran's capital, Tehran, has come under intense fire, often in densely populated residential areas. We've also verified damage at 2 hospitals, where you can see the aftermath of strikes. Panic and fear resound outside Gandhi Hospital in northern Tehran as we can see babies and incubators being moved. Among the targets hit was a compound where Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was located. He was killed in the strike along with a number of other senior officials. Since Saturday, Iran has retaliated with widespread strikes, targeting countries across the region, all the way from Erbil in Iraq down to Doha and Qatar, where verified video shows an object falling to the ground, sending crowds scattering. Other videos show several residential areas across Gulf states being hit, like this high-rise building in Bahrain. And this is the view filmed from inside a flat. And a luxury hotel in Dubai, as well as an oil refinery in Saudi Arabia. We've also verified a video of an American fighter jet in Kuwait falling from the sky. The US military have confirmed 3 fighter jets were mistakenly shot down by Kuwaiti air defences. The Kuwaiti military said the crew is unharmed. Now, Lebanon has also been pulled into the war. Hezbollah, the Lebanese Shia militia group, which has been backed by Iran, targeted Israel late on Sunday night. Israel responded with a wide-ranging assault. This is verified footage of the aftermath of a strike in Dahia, a southern suburb of the Lebanese capital Beirut. The Iranian Red Crescent has said hundreds of people have been killed in Iran following attacks by the US and Israel across more than 130 cities, but we've not been able to independently verify the death toll. International news organisations are often refused visas to Iran, which severely limits our ability to gather information there. There's still a near-total internet blackout in Iran. And countries across the region who've suffered Iran's retaliatory strikes have also reported dozens of deaths, and both Israel and the US have reported fatalities. As tensions escalate further across the region and more countries get pulled into this war, this moment brings great danger and uncertainty, and at BBC Verify, we'll continue to analyse footage as we get it.
Well, let's reflect on the fact that this conflict is now spreading around the Middle East region. I'm joined by Hossam Zaki, who's Assistant Secretary General of the Arab League. Mr. Zaki, thank you for being with us here on BBC News. What is the message that you are giving to Iran at the moment?
Yes, well, it's a terrible judgment call by the Iranian authorities to attack Arab countries. I think it is completely unwarranted, and I think it has shown that the mood in Iran is not a sound mood of decision making. That is not sound in decision making. I think we all condemn this. Our member states have come out and said that this is unacceptable, and that they all reserve the right to retaliate against these continuous acts of aggression.
Hello and welcome back to The Context USA with me, Ben Brown, here in London.
And me, Katrina Perry, in Washington. As the US continues strikes on Iran, we look at how the operation is being received by President Trump's supporters in the Republican Party.
Just before that, the US Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, has been briefing the media today about combat operations against Iran. And he said the United States is carrying out a devastating mission aimed at destroying its missiles, its navy and its capability to develop nuclear weapons.
Indeed, Secretary Pete Hegseth said the war was not an effort to build democracy in the Islamic Republic. Rather, he said the US was hunting and killing those who threatened to kill Americans. Let's have a listen to some of what he said.
If you kill Americans, if you threaten Americans anywhere on earth, we will hunt you down without apology and without hesitation, and we will kill you. President Trump has also been very consistent. Crazy regimes like Iran, hell-bent on prophetic Islamist delusions, cannot have nuclear weapons. It's common sense. Many have said it, but it takes guts to actually enforce it, and our president has guts.
Let's talk a little bit more about just what's involved in this US military operation. We're joined now by retired General Wesley Clark, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. General, thanks for joining us here on BBC News. When we've heard the President, Secretary Hegseth, and indeed Secretary of State Marco Rubio most recently outline what they say the objectives of this mission are, can they be achieved by airstrikes alone and the engagement between naval warships, or is it going to take something more?
It's really too early to say that. When I was a NATO commander in Europe in 1999, we started in with an air campaign. But we also had on the ground the Kosovo Liberation Army in Kosovo. And we ended up having to threaten to bring in an invasion for Serb dictator Slobodan Milosevic relented and pulled his troops out of Kosovo. So we did use escalation dominance. We started slow. We built it up to 1,000 aircraft and 5 aircraft carriers working for us at one point. And so when you look at this campaign, it started, it's a lot bigger objective. It's a lot tougher objective. It started bigger with more advanced surveillance and more advanced targeting and more advanced strike capabilities than we had 28 years ago, 27 years ago. But it's the same principle. You've got to find targets. You've got to find targets that are significant to achieve the political end state that you desire, and then you've got to strike them. And in this case, we've got to take out all of the capacity that Iran has to block the straits and to cause chaos in the neighborhood. And then we don't know whether that's sufficient to cause the Iranians to leadership, the regime, to say, okay, we give up on nuclear weapons. We just want to be here, and then it's up to the people of Iran to decide if they stay or not. We don't know that that's going to happen without putting Marines ashore to keep the Gulf open. We don't know if it's going to happen without putting special operations in to find the nuclear materials that are hidden somewhere, and maybe more than that. So there are uncertainties that lie ahead. There's no question about it.
And with all of those uncertainties, when President Trump is talking about a timeline of 4 to 5 weeks, can he realistically set that sort of timeline, just listening to what you're outlining there?
Well, if I were in position, I wouldn't have set that. But, you know, the public demands a timeline. That's just the way it is in a democracy. I recall in 1999, some people said, oh, surely this is going to be over in 3 to 4 days. Once the Serbs realize NATO is against them, they'll surrender. So we don't know what this is going to take. If Iran pulls a turtle on us and just sits there and says, bomb us to death, we don't care, then other measures may have to be taken. We just don't know. It's unpredictable at this stage. That's what I would say as someone who's been through this.
Yeah, because that's not what we're seeing from Iran right now at this point. Sure, we're not. We're seeing those retaliation strikes on many of its neighbours as well. So with your experience, could we be looking at something much, much longer than that? I mean, we're already seeing an escalation.
Well, of course, Iran would do this because they want to cause chaos in the neighborhood. They believe that if they can disrupt the economies, cause a break in oil shipments, then the pressure will be on the United States to stop the air campaign. And so naturally they would do this. But this is going to be a contest between what we can take out from the air of their ballistic capabilities and their targeting versus what they can hide and then sneak into the attack against us. Will it take 5 days, 7 days, 2 weeks? Don't know. Iran is a very big country. We're only at the edges of it right now. I don't see anything directed at sites in the middle of the country, in the eastern part of the country, but it's their country. Surely there's stuff buried over there, hidden over there that we don't know about at this stage. So I couldn't predict it from the outside. Maybe the people on the inside can. But what I found out about an air campaign is it always starts very optimistically. You've laid out the targets, everybody sees them, they roll in, modern equipment, you hit the targets. But you have to keep generating more targets. And you have to have targets that will have an impact, both militarily and ideally politically. And so that's the challenge we face, is to continue to generate those targets. According to what I hear, we've hit 1,000 targets so far. That's a lot of targets. But after you've hit them and assess them, and some of them have to be hit a second time, but you've got to continue to develop the targets, and that's a challenge.
And speaking of targets, we have seen Iran retaliate against some US military bases already. And there's a big debate, as you know, in this country as to whether the president should have taken this decision or not. People are very fearful, as they are in the region as well. Do you think there's any risk to the US at this point, to the homeland security here?
Well, there's certainly concern that there may be some kind of hit squads that have been released to do damage. We're on the alert. We haven't seen it yet.
Okay. Retired General Wesley Clark, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, thank you very much for joining us here on BBC News.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Let's just go back to our panel. Rina Shah, geopolitical strategist, and Mo Alethi, democratic strategist. Can I ask you both quite briefly? I mean, President Trump has said this is going to last 4 or 5 weeks. Mo, you first. Do you think it's going to be over in 4 to 5 weeks?
I would have no way to know. And, you know, General Clark, I would never question his sense of military strategy. He doesn't know. And I think that's going to be a real problem for the president. There's not a huge appetite for this amongst the American people, in part because, as we've discussed, the president hasn't laid out a compelling case. And the polling shows that people don't have an appetite for this. As their energy prices start to go up, as we do start to see more casualties of American soldiers over there, that appetite's going to become even less. The president promised that he was going to take care of America first, and he has not made a compelling argument as to why this serves that purpose.
We're going to talk more about American public opinion in a minute. But, Rena, I mean, do you think President Trump can keep to that quite tight timetable of 4 to 5 weeks?
There's absolutely no way he can stick to that timeline because of two things. Number one, Iran's internal chaos. There's no clear successor to Khamenei. And then there's an internal council, right, who's sort of running things temporarily with the assembly of experts, so to speak, that's supposed to pick a new supreme leader as soon as possible. But we don't know if that's days or weeks. Then there's also escalation risks. I mean, there's Hezbollah's entry that triggered massive Israeli strikes in Beirut and southern Lebanon. That's a new front, and that pulls in more civilians and risks Lebanon implosion. So I think if the Gulf hits continue, there is absolutely no way anybody can give us a clear sense of when this thing allows the Americans to get out.
Rena and Mo, for the moment, thank you very much. Stay with us.
Now, we just want to bring you some breaking news that has come to us because videos have just been released of Bill and Hillary Clinton's testimonies to U.S. lawmakers from late last week about the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, you might remember the Clintons sat through separate, behind-closed-door depositions with the House Oversight Committee last week. Both denied having any prior knowledge of Epstein's crimes. Let's take a listen to some of that video.
I'm here today basically for two reasons. First of all, I love my country and the Constitution, and I believe America was built on the idea that no one is above the law, especially presidents, and that we should all live by the same set of rules shaped by the Constitution. Democracy requires every person to play their part, and I hope that by being here today, we can bring ourselves a little further away from the brink and back to being a country where we can disagree civilly and search for the truth and justice, and that outweighs the partisan urge for spectacle and point scoring. I will do my part, and I hope you'll do yours. The second reason I'm here is that the girls and women whose lives Jeffrey Epstein destroyed deserve not just justice, but healing. They've been waiting too long for both. Through my brief acquaintance with Jeffrey Epstein, though it ended years before his crimes came to light, and though I never witnessed during our limited interactions any indication of what was going on, I'm here to offer what little I know so I can do my part to prevent something like this from happening again.
And the Republicans on the House Oversight Committee have just released those videos. There are several hours of material, so we are going through them at the moment. We'll have lots of analysis and more clips from those videos in the coming hours. So do stay with us here on BBC News. We also have a live page running all about that on our website, which you can check out as well. We'll be back in just a moment. Do stay here. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Welcome back to The Context USA on BBC News. Well, in his election night victory speech in 2024, Donald Trump told his supporters, "I'm not going to start a war, I'm going to stop wars." He was a president who, of course, built his success on opposing foreign military adventures, not beginning them. But in recent weeks, we've seen the US operation in Venezuela to depose Nicolas Maduro, and now the much bigger and much more open-ended campaign in Iran.
Yeah, and it certainly is a pretty abrupt change of direction, and one that has bewildered and angered part of President Trump's MAGA support base. Now, the former Fox News anchor Tucker Carlson, for example, said the operation against Iran is, quote, absolutely disgusting and evil. The former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene has said, quote, it feels like the worst betrayal because it comes from the very man who we all believed was different. Well, here's the US political journalist Jonathan Karl.
I just heard back from Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson, of course, spoke at the president's convention in 2024. He's been a frequent visitor at the White House. In fact, he was at the White House just last week. So I wanted to know what Tucker Carlson, who has long opposed the idea of another war in the Middle East, what he thought of this. And his answer, he told me of the president's decision is, quote, absolutely disgusting and evil. This is Tucker Carlson, who was at the White House just last week, said that the decision to go to war with Iran is absolutely disgusting and evil.
Well, we've also had an opinion poll on that new US military action in Iran, and it shows that only 1 in 4 Americans actually supports it.
Yeah, 27% of those surveyed were in favour, 29% said they weren't sure, and 43% fully disapproved of it. Let's bring in our panel here, Rina Shah, Republican geopolitical strategist, and Mo Alithi, Democratic strategist. And Rina, to you first. Given those remarks, as we just mentioned there, that we've heard from President Trump about not starting more wars, ending these kind of forever wars, how is the public level support as you're encountering it from amongst other Republicans for what he's doing here?
Well, it's certainly not as strongly worded as Tucker Carlson puts it. I think we Americans have a sense that what we have here within our United States is worthy of porting around the world. But there are many of us, particularly millennials like me, who've gotten tired of that being done and other priorities not being handled. For example, I'm a young mother. I have very young children. The fact that there is still hunger amongst children in the United States is unacceptable to me. I think if we have money for bombs, we have money to feed American children. But I get that not everybody feels that way. I've literally got into arguments with people that are MAGA and America first and feel that the government doesn't need to do certain things. And so, yes, there is a sentiment that this is wrong. This is a betrayal of America first. People like me, though, do understand why the president did this. I believe this was the right move. I was of age. I was 18 when 9/11 happened. So for my entire adult life, I've been living in the 9/11 aftermath. My peers and I understand what it's like to live under the threat of terrorism from outside of our borders. And of course, we're the same generation that has dealt with school shootings as well. So threats from within our borders as well. But what I'm saying here is that I don't believe this was some impulsive bombing for bombing's sake. You know, Iran under the Ayatollahs for 47 years has been waging a one-sided war against the United States and our allies. And so I think this is about so much more than the moment. And I think a lot of people cannot see that because they just believe that any time that we do military action, we are trying to nation build abroad. This is not that, at least not yet.
And Mo, what's your sense of where the public support is on this?
Again, they're not there, in large part because the president hasn't made the case. If he were to make a case like Rina just did, maybe it would soften a little bit in his direction, but he hasn't made a case. He has not made a case as to why now and why this is important to the American people. This is an election year, and people remember when they elected him 2 years ago that he said he was going to focus internally first, and his number one order of business was going to be to bring down costs. During his State of the Union address, he led with energy prices coming down as proof that he was doing what he needed to do. He launched this war, energy prices have gone up. He has not made a compelling case as to why this is worth the cost, both in lives and treasure. And so heading into this midterm election year, there are probably quite a few Republican members of Congress right now who are a little bit nervous that if he doesn't make the case, if this is a long, protracted engagement, if more American lives are lost, if there is no stability, and history is not on our side when it comes to stability in these situations, there are a lot of members of Congress who worry that they're going to feel it, feel the voters' anger at the ballot box. The president needs to make a more compelling case than what he did today and what his administration's been doing in the past few days.
Okay.
If he wants to turn that around.
Mo and Rina, thank you very much indeed. You're watching The Context USA. Let's just talk then more about the wider picture of the issues in the Middle East. Also bringing in the cost of oil, which we've just been discussing. Now, that cost of oil has surged today, passing $3 a gallon for the first time since November 2023. Iran has responded to the US and Israeli attacks on the country by striking regional production centres and disrupting shipping in the Strait of Hormuz as well. So let's bring in our North America business correspondent Samira Hussein, who's in New York, for us. Well, I suppose, as we were just reflecting there, the big danger for Donald Trump is the price of gas in the United States is going to go up because of, and inflation generally, because of energy prices soaring as a result of what's happening in the Middle East and in Iran.
We just heard from Secretary Marco Rubio there speaking in Congress, or rather just outside the halls of Congress, and he actually made mention of that the United States is aware that these incursions or these attacks in Iran and the subsequent war is really going to have an impact when it comes to energy prices, and has said that the administration will be making some kind of announcement in terms of trying to mitigate some of these price increases for Americans, and that announcement is supposed to come on Tuesday. So certainly in terms of, trying to keep in mind the wider impact of what can happen as a result of these attacks in Iran and the war that is currently playing out over the last few days, there is a real sense that energy prices are definitely going to go up for Americans here.
OK, Samira, for the moment, thank you very much. Let's go back quickly to our panel, Rina and Mo. Rina, could this all backfire on President Trump politically in terms of the midterm elections? Because all of this may well be highly inflationary, and we know that American voters do not like higher prices.
Yeah, on Sunday here in these United States, if you were watching the numbers, you could see that spike in oil pricing go as the GCC was being attacked by Iran. So certainly oil is number one, because you've got families who feel the pressures of inflation already. We start to get towards the midterms, and oil continues to tick up towards $4 a gallon. I mean, we're just really looking at hard times for American families, and we've already got them, because what the Trump administration has been doing for the past year is continuing to blame the Biden administration for the price of daily commodities. Right now, they have, up till now, and not to my knowledge, over the past many weeks, particularly over the holiday season, they never made the case about the price of goods coming down. It's just been a messaging boondoggle, as we call it over here, from this administration. So I am really surprised that hasn't been taken into greater consideration by this president. The fact that he could really fall out of favor. I think, of course, these strikes, the timing, he relied on intelligence to take his best shot, obviously, at trying to kill Khamenei, and that went well, fine. But now the hard part begins. So I don't think the president is thinking very clearly, and he's taking the greatest, biggest risk of his entire political life. I am very curious to see how this shakes out.
OK, Mo, just the last minute to you. Is this the greatest political risk of Donald Trump's life, do you think?
Well, he's already in his weakest ever political standing. His approval ratings are not just the lowest he's ever faced. They're the lowest of any president at this point of their term in modern history. So he's already on shaky ground. And so this is going to be very tricky for him. He promised the American people he was going to bring down prices. He launched a global trade war with his tariffs. Prices went up. He launched a kinetic war in Iran. Gas prices have gone up. At some point, he's got to realize that the one thing people voted for him on to take care of, he is failing them on. That's very, very dangerous headed into this midterm for the president.
It's been great having you both with us. Thank you so much indeed for discussing day 3 of America and Israel's war in Iran. Rina Shah and Mo Alithi, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for watching. You've been watching The Context USA on BBC News.
On a third day of coordinated strikes by Israel and the US across Iran, the war has already pulled in several other countries across the region. At BBC Verify, we've been continuing to analyse and verify dozens of videos and pinpoint exactly which locations have been hit. US and Israeli strikes have hit targets across Iran. Iran's capital, Tehran, has come under intense fire, often in densely populated residential areas. We've also verified damage at 2 hospitals, where you can see the aftermath of strikes. Panic and fear resound outside Gandhi Hospital in northern Tehran as we can see babies and incubators being moved. Among the targets hit was a compound where Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was located. He was killed in the strike along with a number of other senior officials. Since Saturday, Iran has retaliated with widespread strikes, targeting countries across the region, all the way from Erbil in Iraq down to Doha and Qatar, where verified video shows an object falling to the ground, sending crowds scattering. Other videos show several residential areas across Gulf states being hit, like this high-rise building in Bahrain. And this is the view filmed from inside a flat. And a luxury hotel in Dubai, as well as an oil refinery in Saudi Arabia. We've also verified a video of an American fighter jet in Kuwait falling from the sky. The US military have confirmed 3 fighter jets were mistakenly shot down by Kuwaiti air defences. The Kuwaiti military said the crew is unharmed. Now, Lebanon has also been pulled into the war. Hezbollah, the Lebanese Shia militia group, which has been backed by Iran, targeted Israel late on Sunday night. Israel responded with a wide-ranging assault. This is verified footage of the aftermath of a strike in Dahia, a southern suburb of the Lebanese capital, Beirut. The Iranian Red Crescent has said hundreds of people have been killed in Iran following attacks by the US and Israel across more than 130 cities, but we've not been able to independently verify the death toll. International news organisations are often refused visas to Iran, which severely limits our ability to gather information there. There's still a near-total internet blackout in Iran. And countries across the region who've suffered Iran's retaliatory strikes have also reported dozens of deaths, and both Israel and the US have reported fatalities. As tensions escalate further across the region and more countries get pulled into this war, this moment brings great danger and uncertainty, and at BBC Verify, we'll continue to analyse footage as we get it.
Well, let's
At 10, Donald Trump says the war with Iran was the last best chance to stop the country's regime, as the US military confirms 6 service members have now been killed.
Today, the United States military continues to carry out large-scale combat operations in Iran to eliminate the grave threats posed to America by this terrible terrorist regime.
There are more strikes hitting Iran right now. Israeli-US attacks continue into a third day, with the Iranian Red Crescent saying at least 550 people have been killed. Iranian missiles hit Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and targets here in Israel as the war escalates across the Middle East. Strikes close the world's biggest oil and gas facilities in some Gulf states, sending prices soaring. 3 American jets are shot down by friendly fire in Kuwait, while Sir Keir Starmer says British involvement in the war will be for defensive operations only.
This government does not believe in regime change from the skies.
The Prime Minister explicit there about his view, the government's view, and explicit too about his disagreement with President Trump.
And tonight, some of the 300,000 Brits in the region have returned home.
We heard explosions, we heard the hotel was shake, we could see columns of black smoke, we saw drone interceptions.
As a third day of war draws to a close, we'll be reporting from across the region, from Dubai, Doha, Beirut, Cyprus, the Iranian border, and we'll hear directly from Iranians about what they want to happen next.
From Broadcasting House across the UK and around the globe, Newsnight brings you fresh insights and interviews, and a first look at the front pages.
Hello to you. We're live in Tel Aviv as Donald Trump reiterates the war with Iran is designed to eliminate the threat from a terrorist regime, and going to war was the last best chance to stop Iran posing a threat to America. In the last hour, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio went further, saying Washington anticipated a strike on Iran from Israel and so launched a preemptive campaign to prevent reprisals against America. It comes as the US and Israel continued military strikes for a third day, with the Iranian Red Crescent saying more than 550 people have now been killed. Well, there's been a significant escalation of the conflict, with Iran staging retaliatory strikes right across the Middle East following the killing of its supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. While the US and Israel have continued their attacks on Iranian targets, including in Tehran, with many huge explosions reported there today. Lebanon has been drawn into the conflict, with the health ministry there saying at least 52 people have been killed in Israeli strikes. Israel says it was simply responding to attacks by the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah. And Iran has continued to hit back at states and bases allied to the US across the Middle East. In Cyprus, 2 drones heading for RAF Akrotiri were intercepted following a drone attack last night. Iran has also targeted energy sites, including this oil refinery in Saudi Arabia and a major gas plant in Qatar. Global oil and gas prices have now risen sharply. And in Kuwait, 3 US fighter jets crashed after being mistakenly shot down by friendly fire. All 6 crew ejected safely. Well, Jeremy Bowen, our international editor, has our first report tonight on day 3 of the war.
6 missiles struck Sanadaj in Iran's Kurdistan province. Official Iranian media said densely populated neighborhoods were hit. The Americans filmed their destruction of a missile launcher. They say they're working through a list of military targets. This is a satellite image of an Iranian naval vessel on fire inside the seawall in the port of Bandar Abbas. But Iranian civilians are also in the firing line. Overnight in Tehran, children were among those treated after the Gandhi hospital was badly damaged. The hospital is out of use. Israel's prime minister said they're targeting tyrants in Tehran to protect civilians. But war is never as clean or simple as a soundbite. In Kuwait, 3 American F-15 warplanes were shot down. The Americans said, mistakenly, by friendly fire from the Kuwaitis. Their crews ejected safely. And in Washington, Donald Trump is back at the White House from Florida. He believes this war of choice was an opportunity not to be missed.
This was our last best chance to strike what we're doing right now and eliminate the intolerable threats posed by this sick and sinister regime. And they are indeed sick and sinister. Our objectives are clear. First, we're destroying Iran's missile capabilities, and you see that happening on an hourly basis, and their capacity to produce brand new ones, and pretty good ones they make. Second, we're annihilating their navy. We've knocked out already 10 ships. They're at the bottom of the sea. Third, we're ensuring that the world's #1 sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon.
The war is spreading across the Middle East. The Saudis' biggest oil refinery, Ras Tanura, was shut down by an Iranian attack. Iran is targeting Arab oil states across the Gulf, trying to disrupt and outflank America's power, hoping the Saudis and others will put pressure on Donald Trump to end the war. But making Gulf Arab states who did not want the war into targets, this was Dubai, looks to be a bad mistake for Iran, pushing them closer to the US and Israel. The Israelis attacked Beirut after Iran's Lebanese ally Hezbollah fired into Israel's north. Hezbollah was considered to be one of Iran's main weapons against Israel until the Israelis killed its leaders and destroyed much of its missile stockpile in the Gaza war. Israel is now threatening a new offensive in Lebanon. It feels as if Israel and the US see an opportunity to take care of unfinished business in the region. It's coming at a cost for the Israelis, with funerals in Bet Shemesh near Jerusalem of civilians killed by an Iranian missile. Israel's air defense system is strong, but not infallible. It has a finite supply of interceptors. Iran is calibrating its attacks to try to force Israel to burn through its defenses. In Bet Shemesh, Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, restated his war aims.
If this regime, this terrorist regime of the kind we've never seen in the world, if they get nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them, ballistic missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles, they will threaten all of humanity.
In Tehran tonight, the regime's loyalists are back on the streets. They've built an important core of support. Over the weekend, they filled the main square in the city of Isfahan. An internet blackout makes it hard to gauge the mood in Iran, but BBC Persian has been able to contact Iranians who want the fall of the regime.
Bakeries and petrol stations are busy. The streets are not busy. The main concern here is that the US might do a deal and the authorities begin oppressing people all over again. I think the Revolutionary Guard still has power on the ground, and this is what makes people afraid.
People feel anxious and elated all at once. With every explosion, some shout with joy from their windows.
There are many security stations around the city stopping people that they deem suspicious. We are tired, very tired. The death of Khamenei is not enough. They all need to go.
It is only day 3 of the war. This has a long way to go. A deepening debate about the legality of America and Israel's decision to go to war, probably weeks of airstrikes, and without doubt, years of consequences. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News.
An overview there of the main developments today from Jeremy. Well, in the last hour, it's been confirmed that 6 US service personnel have now been killed in action. Earlier, Donald Trump said he attacked Iran because it was the last best chance to strike and to eliminate the intolerable threats posed by this sick and sinister regime. Well, Sarah Smith is live outside the White House for us now. Sarah.
Yeah, Donald Trump was in sunny Florida when he launched this attack on Iran, but he's now back here in a snowy White House where he appeared live on television talking about the war for the first time. But he didn't take questions from any of the reporters like me who were in the room with him. Donald Trump was awarding medals to the heroes of previous American wars as he made his case for why today's serving military are risking their lives again.
The regime already had missiles capable of hitting Europe and our bases, both local and overseas, and would soon have had missiles capable of reaching our beautiful America. The purpose of this fast-growing missile program was to shield their nuclear weapon development.
Donald Trump always railed against the war in Iraq and other previous American attempts to effect regime change. He promised voters no new foreign wars. The Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth, served in Iraq. He says this conflict is different from that invasion in 2003.
No stupid rules of engagement, no nation-building quagmire, no democracy-building exercise, no politically correct wars. We fight to win, and we don't waste time. This is not a so-called regime change war. But the regime sure did change. And the world is better off for it.
When 3 US fighter jets were down by friendly fire in Kuwait, no Americans died. The pilots ejected safely. But 6 military personnel have been killed already, 18 seriously wounded. It's news like this that makes formerly loyal Trump supporters cry betrayal. Ex-Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene reposted pictures of what Iran said was the strike that hit a school building and said, "I did not vote for this in elections or Congress. This is not what we thought MAGA was supposed to be. Shame." President Trump did not ask Congress for a vote to authorise military action before launching this attack. And Democrats say they have not heard a convincing reason for attacking Iran.
Will the real reason for this operation please stand up? Because it is changing by the hour, right? It's regime change one moment. It's some undefined imminent threat, which, by the way, is a lie, right? There is no imminent threat.
The Secretary of State came to Congress to explain the need for this attack, despite Iran being years away from developing a nuclear weapon.
The objectives of this operation are to destroy their ballistic missile capability and make sure they can't rebuild it, and make sure that they can't hide behind that to have a nuclear program. That's the objective of the mission. That said, abundantly clear, we would love for there to be an Iran that's not governed by radical Shia clerics.
Donald Trump is already facing opposition to this war at home from both the left and the right. Opposition that may grow as American casualties inevitably increase.
Sarah, there do seem to be shifting rationales for this war coming from American officials. Regime change, fears over reprisals after an Israeli attack, imminent threats, nuclear weapons ambitions, and so on. I suppose all that could be true at the same time, but are the American people a little confused?
Yeah, I think they have every right to be, because they hear different things from different people at different times. When Donald Trump was speaking here earlier today, he did not repeat his call for the Iranian people to rise up and overthrow their government, which he had asked them to do at the weekend. But then we heard from Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, who was basically saying regime change is not the objective of this conflict, but it would be a very welcome development if it happened. And the other big question is, we know Iran does not have a nuclear weapon and was not on the brink of developing one, not least because the US bombed their nuclear sites just 9 months ago. So why was this attack necessary now? Well, what we've been hearing from administration officials today is that it was necessary to take out Iran's ballistic conventional weapons, because if and when it did develop a nuclear weapon, it would use those conventional weapons to defend it. And we've also heard from a couple of people today, the biggest wave of attacks of this war has not even begun yet.
All right. Sarah, thank you. Sarah Smith, our North America editor there, live outside the White House. Well, it's understood RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire and the military base at Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean will be used by the Americans for defensive strikes on Iranian missile sites. Meanwhile, sirens have been sounding at RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus, warning of a potential attack. The British base there has already been targeted by Iran. One drone hit the runway. Security has been boosted with additional fighter jets, but families on the base have been told to leave. Jessica Parker has just arrived in Larnaca in Cyprus for us and can speak to us now. Jessica, I suppose these are particularly anxious times for the folks on the base.
Absolutely. It's been a pretty dramatic 48 hours here in Cyprus. So today we heard from the Cypriot government that 2 drones have been intercepted, that they say were heading towards the base RAF at Krateri. And that's after, as you mentioned, a drone actually struck the base on Sunday night. There were no casualties, we're told, and the damage was limited. But where did that drone come from? Well, there are unconfirmed reports that the Iranian-backed Hezbollah group in Lebanon may have been behind the launch, but that has not been confirmed. What has been confirmed by UK officials is that they say that that first drone was launched before UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer said the US could use bases for what he's described as limited and defensive measures in order to strike Iranian missile sites. In the House of Commons, the British Prime Minister also said that Cyprus, bases here in Cyprus, were not being used by US bombers. The Cypriot government itself very keen to stress that it isn't involved in the wider conflict. And for the people of Cyprus, of course, an anxious wait to see if the situation escalates.
Jess, thank you. Jess Parker, who's just arrived on Cyprus for us. Thank you. Well, Sir Keir Starmer says the government doesn't believe in regime change from the skies and said his decision not to get involved in the initial strikes on Iran was in Britain's national interest. That is what I've done and I stand by it, he said. Well, his statement in the Commons came after Donald Trump said he was very disappointed in the Prime Minister for taking too long to accept a US request to use British military bases for defensive strikes on Iranian missile sites. Well, Chris Mason is at Westminster for us tonight. Chris.
Clive, the Prime Minister today explicitly and directly set out his view on this conflict after a couple of days in which his ministers were really struggling to cogently articulate what they made of America and Israel's actions and why. Let me play you around half a dozen contributions to the debate in the House of Commons this afternoon. It lasted for around 2.5 hours. We'll start with the Prime Minister.
This government does not believe in regime change from the skies, and I thank him for his question. The lessons of history have taught us that it is important when we make decisions like this that we establish there is a lawful basis for what the United Kingdom is doing. That is one of the lessons from Iraq. And that there's a viable, thought-through plan. They're the principles I applied to the decision not to get involved in the offensive strikes of the US and Israel. They're also the principles I applied separately to the separate decision and a separate request from the US to be able to take defensive action.
On Saturday, our allies in Canada and Australia immediately backed the action taken by America against this despotic regime in Tehran. And I have made it very clear that the Conservative Party also stands behind America taking this necessary action against state-sponsored terror.
Does he not understand that after 10 years of negotiation that have failed, actually the West was left with no alternative? And does he understand also that actually, in refusing to support the US, he has humiliated us on the international stage?
We have seen before what happens when an American president launches an illegal war with no idea how or when it is going to end, and we fear for what comes next.
We also condemn the deeply irresponsible and illegal attack by the US and Israel on Iran, launched in the middle of nuclear negotiations.
The best tribute to the murderers in Tehran and the Iranian regime is a maintenance of an international rules-based system. And more than that, we owe it to the people across the region to learn from the instability that we had in the aftermath of Iraq.
The question for today that people want us to ask is when will people be coming home, especially from Doha and Dubai?
Prime Minister said there are around 300,000 Britons in the region and the Foreign Office is working hard to bring people home as quickly and safely as we can, he said. There is a YouGov poll out tonight which gives us some sense of public opinion on the events of the last few days. The poll suggesting that far more people in Britain oppose America's actions than support them, and far more oppose allowing the US to use UK air bases then support that. All of this on the day where perhaps we've seen the biggest public disagreement yet between the Prime Minister and President Trump.
Chris, thank you. Chris Mason, our political editor there, live at Westminster. Well, our correspondents across the region have all the latest developments. Wira Davis is in Beirut. Ola Gearin is standing by in Erbil in northern Iraq. And Barbara Plett-Usher is in the Qatari capital, Doha. We're going to start with you, Wira, first in the Lebanese capital, which is now a new front in this war.
Yeah, Clive, look, this is exactly what the Lebanese government and most people here didn't want, to get involved in another costly, divisive conflict with Israel. But the key thing here is Hezbollah. Hezbollah, of course, was a key ally of the Islamic regime in Iran. And when that was attacked, Hezbollah, which is still quite powerfully independent here, decided it was going to attack Israel with some missiles overnight. Israel's response to that was overwhelming, attacking Hezbollah positions here in the capital, in Beirut, and in the south of the country. There were explosions all day long, intermittently, drones overhead, and 52 people were killed in those strikes. And I think Israel has decided that it can't trust the Lebanese government to deal with Hezbollah. So the Israelis have said tonight that they're going to carry on targeting specific Hezbollah figures and installations until they're happy that Hezbollah has been defeated. And to that end tonight, there's been a warning to more than 30 towns and villages in southern Lebanon to be evacuated because that Israeli military operation is ongoing.
And Ola, you're in Erbil. US troops are stationed there, making it a target for Iranian proxy groups.
Indeed, Clive, and last night there were flames in the night sky here in Erbil after an attack on a major US base at Erbil International Airport, which is just in the distance behind me. Safe to assume the base had been emptied out by then. It was such an obvious target. The drones and the missiles were intercepted by air defence systems, but an ammunition dump caught fire. Now, again, during the day today, there was targeting of US locations. The US consulate, which is housed in a very large complex here, was targeted twice, and we heard a very loud bang at one stage, which was the sound of one of those drones being intercepted. No reports of any casualties there, Clive. A video has emerged on social media which appears to show a fragment of a drone that tore through the roof of a residential building, landed inside a family's apartment, and they appear to have had a lucky escape. Now, it was inevitable that when Israel and America began their attack on Saturday against Iran, that countries around the region, neighbouring countries, were going to pay the price, whether or not they agree with that war. And that is what we are seeing out. We are seeing the fallout spreading around the region tonight. Worth mentioning, Clive, that the attacks here are not being claimed by Tehran. They're being claimed by some of Iran's proxies, militia groups here in Iraq. It shows you the complexity of what is taking place.
Absolutely. And Barbara, in Doha, after Iranian strikes, there's news that Qatar's actually shot down 2 fighter jets.
Yes, quite a development. The Defense Ministry says Qatar has successfully shot down 2 fighter jets coming from Iran. It didn't give any details, but it seems an escalation because the Iranians so far have been firing hundreds of missiles and drones at their Arab neighbors. But this is the first we've heard of them sending a warplane. And it's quite extraordinary for a Gulf state to be shooting down a manned Iranian aircraft. The Qataris say that they are acting in defense, that they are responding firmly to an external threat. And this comes after another major development here, which is that the Qataris have stopped production of liquid natural gas after drones targeted 2 main plants, 2 of the main processing plants, which caused an almost immediate spike in gas prices or gas prices in Europe. And then plus there was a drone attack on Saudi Arabia's main oil refinery. So Iran showing for the first time that it is willing to target energy infrastructure.
Okay, Barbara in Doha, Ola in Erbil, and Wira Davis in Beirut. Many thanks to you all. Well, that's all from us here in Tel Aviv, in Israel. Before I hand back to Rita, here's Victoria with what's coming up on Newsnight over on BBC Two shortly. Hi there.
Hi. In the last hour, the US Secretary of State has said the hardest hits are yet to come on Iran. So what happens next? We'll speak to former Conservative Cabinet Minister Michael Gove, your party's Jeremy Corbyn, and Middle East expert Sanam Vakil to find out. Newsnight live at 10:30 on BBC Two. See you soon.
Victoria, thank you. Now, much of the airspace in the Gulf is closed, but an Etihad flight from Abu Dhabi has just landed at Heathrow, bringing home hundreds of holidaymakers and travellers. This is the current picture of flights in the region. As you can see, planes are avoiding Iran and the area around it. The Prime Minister said the government was looking at all options to support Britons currently stuck in the Middle East. Luke Deal reports now from Dubai.
British nationals are among the hundreds of thousands of travellers stranded in the Gulf Arab states as major airports remain closed following retaliatory strikes from Iran. Many flights to and from countries in the Middle East are impacted as the conflict in the region continues. Dawn and her husband Nick contacted BBC Your Voice. They should have arrived back from the United Arab Emirates this afternoon after a week's holiday. They're booked onto a BA flight for Saturday. They hope it will take off.
Our plans might come to nothing, probably will do.
There's an option, possibly, of driving to Muscat in Oman, which is about 5 to 6 hours away from here, and getting a flight home from there.
Isabel is stuck in transit in Abu Dhabi, stranded after her flight to Thailand was cancelled. She has accommodation, but she's very fearful and has had little help.
My family are incredibly worried. They're trying to contact the embassy and Etihad because we've had no communication from either. I have signed up to the alerts from the British embassy, but as of yet, haven't had any update.
The travel situation here in Dubai remains extremely fluid. However, within the last hour, Emirates, the main airline, have issued a statement saying that they're going to be operating a limited number of flights commencing tonight, the 2nd of March. We're accommodating customers with earlier bookings as a priority, they say. And for those who have been rebooked to travel on these limited flights, they will be contacted directly by the airline. Meanwhile, passengers have arrived into Heathrow this evening on a flight from Abu Dhabi.
We heard explosions, we heard the hotel shake, we could see columns of black smoke, we saw drone interceptions ahead. And while we were having breakfast on Sunday morning, there was black ash falling on the breakfast table.
There were quite loud explosions being heard and quite a lot of military jets flying over. I've never had anything like it, never been so scared in all my life.
Officials at the Foreign Office are understood to be working on plans for potential evacuation routes should the airspace here in the Gulf remain closed. Luke Deal, BBC News, Dubai.
As the US promises more punishing strikes on Iran, what exactly is the US strategy? And as the Prime Minister has his biggest public disagreement with President Trump yet, is the UK now at war too? Good evening. Welcome to Monday's Newsnight, live from Broadcasting House. Tonight, our whole programme will be focused on the latest war in the Middle East, as you would expect. Hello. President Trump says US and Israeli military action against Iran could last at least a month. And today he said it's designed to destroy Iranian missiles, its navy and its nuclear ambitions. In the last 60 minutes or so, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has doubled down.
I'm not going to give away the details of our tactical efforts, but the hardest hits are yet to come from the U.S. military. The next phase will be even more punishing on Iran than it is right now. Someone was screaming, how long will it take? I don't know how long it'll take. We have objectives. We will do this as long as it takes to achieve those objectives, and we will achieve those objectives. The world will be a safer place when we're done with this operation. All right? Thank you, guys. Thank you.
So far in Iran, over 500 people have been killed, including its supreme leader. In response, Iran has fired drones and missiles at targets in 10 different countries, including Israel, Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Oman, the UAE, Jordan and Qatar. Let me introduce your panel this evening. Dr. Sanam Vakil, Director of the Middle East and North Africa Programme at the Chatham House Global Affairs think tank. Former Conservative Cabinet Minister Lord Gove, now editor of The Spectator magazine, and former leader of the Labour Party, now independent MP Jeremy Corbyn, and of course our political editor Nick Watt. Let me ask you all, Michael Gove first of all, how grave is this moment?
Hugely so. So, as we've just heard, almost every country in the Middle East is involved in some way. The citizens of those countries, and indeed British citizens in many of those countries, have their lives in peril at the moment. But more broadly, this is part, I think, of a genuinely titanic struggle between the United States and those whom it sees as its strategic adversaries. And you cannot disconnect what is happening now in Iran with what happened in Venezuela and the broader struggle that America sees itself pitched into with China.
Dr. Vakil, how do you see this moment?
Also, a very dangerous moment. This is not a war between Iran and the United States, although that might have been the intent. This is a war that is clearly spreading across the region. All of those countries have been brought in. But it's also going to be dragging in the UK, Europe. And I think within the next few days, you will see Gulf states having to make some tough choices. Their sovereignty has been violated, and they might be brought in as well.
OK. And Jeremy Corbyn, what about yourself?
Incredibly dangerous time, incredibly dangerous moment. We now have a war going on in all those countries over the Middle East. You also pointed out we have the war going on against Venezuela and the threats being made to Cuba. We have the United States security strategy there in our faces now. Surely to goodness, this is a time to call out Trump. He walked away from what were apparently quite promising nuclear negotiations with Iran. He was more interested in starting a war. The losers in this war are going to be all those innocent people that die.
We'll come back.
And the arms trade is going to do very well out of this war.
OK. Dr. Vakil, you said some tough choices for certain nations. What did you mean?
Well, over the course of just 48 hours now, Iran has struck out across the Middle East, violated the sovereignty of many of its neighbors. And these were countries that had built back ties with Iran, that were trying to negotiate on behalf of the Islamic Republic and the United States. And now they have been attacked, not just U.S. military bases,